The internet woke up to chaos and nobody saw it coming. Fans were left stunned, timelines exploded, and within minutes, one name was trending everywhere: Claressa Shields. But it wasn't for her achievements this time. It was something far more explosive, something personal, messy, and deeply controversial. According to shocking claims circulating online, a video was allegedly leaked, and the finger was immediately pointed at none other than 50 Cent. The same 50 Cent known for stirring drama suddenly found himself at the center of a storm that dragged multiple lives into the spotlight. And at the heart of it all, accusations that Claressa Shields had been cheating on Papoose. Fans were confused, some were angry, others refused to believe it, because this wasn't just gossip, this was a full-blown scandal. Is this real? One fan tweeted, "There's no way she would do that." Another commented, but then things took an even darker turn. Claressa didn't stay silent. In a moment that sent shockwaves across social media, she finally addressed the situation, and what she said only made everything more intense. Emotions ran high as she spoke out, defending herself, questioning motives, and hinting that there was much more happening behind the scenes than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Papoose, who many believed was caught in the middle of this alleged betrayal, remained unusually quiet. His silence only fueled speculation. Was he hurt? Was he blindsided? Or did he know something the public didn't? And 50 Cent, he wasn't backing down either. Cryptic posts, subtle jabs, and a trail of online breadcrumbs that had fans connecting doubts, forming theories, and diving deeper into the drama with every passing hour. The internet became a battlefield, sides were taken, friendships were questioned. And as more details began to surface, one thing became painfully clear: this wasn't just a rumor anymore. This was a story unraveling in real time, filled with accusations, emotions, and secrets that refused to stay hidden. But here's the real question: what actually happened behind closed doors? And is this just the beginning of something even bigger? The situation escalated faster than anyone could have predicted, and within hours of the first rumors surfacing, the entire internet had turned into a battlefield of speculation, assumptions, and emotionally charged reactions. What started as a whisper quickly transformed into a full-scale storm, with fans dissecting every detail, every post, and every silence as if it held the key to a much larger truth. At the center of it all was Claressa Shields, a figure known for strength, discipline, and dominance in her field. But now, instead of being celebrated, her name was being dragged into a narrative that painted a completely different picture. The allegations being circulated were not just damaging, they were explosive, filled with betrayal, secrecy, and a storyline that felt almost too dramatic to be real. The claim that a private video had been leaked shook the foundation of everything fans believed. The idea that such a personal moment could somehow become public raised serious questions about trust, loyalty, and the intentions of those allegedly involved. And then came the name that made everything even more intense: 50 Cent. The moment his name entered the narrative, everything changed. He was no stranger to controversy, known for his calculated moves and ability to stir attention. His presence in this situation made the story feel less like a rumor and more like a calculated explosion waiting to unfold. Fans began connecting dots, revisiting past interactions, analyzing old social media posts, and trying to understand whether this was a coincidence or something far more deliberate. At the same time, Papoose's name being pulled into the situation added another layer of emotional weight. The narrative quickly shifted from simple allegations to something deeper, a story of potential betrayal that left fans emotionally invested and divided. Some believed he was completely unaware, a victim of circumstances unfolding beyond his control. Others speculated that there was more beneath the surface, something hidden that had yet to be revealed. As the hours passed, social media feeds became flooded with opinions. Some defended Claressa, insisting that the entire situation was fabricated, a targeted attempt to damage her reputation. Others questioned her silence in the early moments, interpreting it as hesitation, as if there was something she was trying to process before responding. And then there were those who focused entirely on the alleged role of 50 Cent. Theories began circulating that this wasn't random, that there was a motive, that this was part of a larger pattern of calculated exposure and manipulation designed to keep attention firmly locked on him while dragging others into the spotlight. The intensity of this situation grew when anonymous sources' accounts with no clear identity started sharing what they claimed were inside details. These posts spread like wildfire, each one adding a neat twist, a new layer of complexity. That made it nearly impossible to separate fact from fiction. Fans were shocked, emotions ran high, and the online community became deeply divided. Some users began digging into timelines, attempting to reconstruct events leading up to the alleged incident. They analyzed past appearances, interactions, and even subtle body language from old videos, searching for any hint that could support or disprove the claims. Meanwhile, others focused on the psychological aspect of the situation. They questioned what it would mean for someone to have their private life exposed in such a dramatic way. The pressure, the public scrutiny, the overwhelming noise of millions of opinions, all of it created an environment where even the strongest individuals could feel cornered. As the story continued to unfold, Claressa's eventual response became one of the most anticipated moments. When she finally addressed the situation, it wasn't just a statement, it was a shift in the entire narrative. Instead of confirming or denying in a simple manner, her response introduced a new perspective. She hinted at manipulation, at hidden agendas, at forces working behind the scenes to create a story that was far more complicated than it appeared on the surface. This only intensified the situation. Fans who had initially doubted her began reconsidering their stance. Others became even more skeptical, interpreting her words as deflection rather than clarification. The ambiguity of her response created a space where multiple interpretations could exist simultaneously, each one fueling further debate at the same time. The absence of a clear response from Papoose continued to raise questions. His silence became a story in itself, with fans speculating about what it meant. Was he processing the situation privately? Was he choosing to stay out of the public eye to avoid escalating the drama? Or was his silence an indication of something deeper, something that had yet to surface? The lack of clarity turned every small action into a major headline. A simple post, a deleted comment, a subtle change in tone, everything was analyzed, dissected, and turned into evidence for one theory or another. Meanwhile, attention began shifting back to 50 Cent. His online activity did not go unnoticed. While he didn't directly address the allegations in a straightforward manner, his posts carried a tone that many interpreted as suggestive, indirect references, cryptic captions, and carefully chosen timing created an atmosphere where fans felt like they were watching a story unfold in fragments, each piece revealing just enough to keep them hooked. This strategy, intentional or not, kept the situation alive. Every post sparked new conversations. Every reaction added fuel to the fire, and the cycle of speculation continued without pause. As the days went on, the emotional toll of the situation became more apparent. What started as entertainment for some began to feel overwhelming for others. The constant flow of information, the conflicting narratives, and the intensity of public opinion created a pressure that extended beyond the individuals directly involved. Fans began to question their own role in the situation. Were they witnessing the truth, or were they contributing to a narrative that had been carefully constructed for maximum impact? The line between reality and performance became increasingly blurred, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get more complicated, another twist emerged. New claims surfaced suggesting that the alleged video might not have originated from where people in it highly believed. This revelation shifted attention once again, introducing the possibility that the entire situation had been misunderstood from the very beginning. If true, it would change everything. It would mean that the accusations, the reactions, the emotional responses, all of it had been built on an incomplete or incorrect foundation. But by this point, the damage had already been done. Reputations were being questioned, relationships were under scrutiny, and the public had already formed opinions that would not be easily changed. The uncertainty of the situation became its most powerful element, because without clear answers, the story continued to evolve. And as it evolved, it pulled more people into its orbit, each one adding their own interpretation, their own perspective, their own version of what they believed to be the truth. The drama was no longer contained. It had become something bigger, something unpredictable, something that refused to settle. And as the tension continued to build, one thing became clear: this was far from over, and what came next would only make everything even more intense. This was far from over, and what came next would only make everything even more intense. The atmosphere surrounding the situation shifted dramatically as a new wave of speculation took over social media. Just when people thought they had already seen the peak of the controversy, fresh theories, deeper accusations, and more calculated narratives began to emerge. It no longer felt like a single incident being discussed, it felt like a layered story slowly unraveling, revealing complexities that no one had initially considered. The focus began to move beyond just the alleged video. Now, people wanted context, they wanted timelines, motives, and connections that could explain how everything had spiraled so quickly into chaos. The internet turned into an investigative space, with users piecing together fragments of information like detectives trying to solve a mystery that refused to present a clear answer. Old interviews resurfaced. Past interactions were reanalyzed. Even the smallest details, things that once seemed insignificant, were now being viewed through a completely different lens. Fans were shocked at how quickly narratives could shift. Emotions ran high as people debated endlessly, trying to determine who was telling the truth and who might be hiding something. Every side had its supporters, and every supporter had their own interpretation of events. But one of the most intriguing developments was the growing belief that this situation might not have been accidental at all. There were whispers that everything had been building up for a long time, that tensions had existed behind the scenes, that what the public was seeing now was simply the explosion of something that had been quietly brewing then. At the surface, this theory gained traction when several social media users pointed out subtle patterns, moments where interactions between the individuals involved seemed slightly off, moments that, in hindsight, felt like early warning signs of a much bigger fallout. The narrative was evolving, and it was becoming more complicated with every passing hour. At the same time, the pressure on Claressa intensified. Her initial response, which had already sparked debates, was now being dissected word by word. People analyzed her tone, her choice of language, and even the timing of her statement. Some believed she was standing her ground, refusing to let false accusations define her. Others felt that there were gaps in her explanation, spaces where questions remained unanswered. The lack of a definitive conclusion only added to the tension. It created an environment where speculation thrived. And speculation, in a situation like this, was dangerous because it didn't require proof. It only required curiosity. Meanwhile, attention once again circled back to the alleged involvement of 50 Cent. His online presence continued to play a significant role in keeping the situation alive. Without directly confirming anything, his activity created an ongoing sense of anticipation. Each post, each subtle remark, felt like a piece of a puzzle that no one could fully complete. Fans began to question his intentions. Was he deliberately fueling the fire, or was he simply reacting to the chaos unfolding around him? The ambiguity of his actions made it impossible to reach a clear conclusion, and that uncertainty kept people watching closely. Every move was monitored, every update was scrutinized. It was as if the entire internet had collectively decided that this story was too important to ignore. But while the public focused on speculation, another layer of the situation began to emerge, one that shifted the emotional weight of the narrative. The impact on relationships. What had initially been viewed as a scandal involving individuals now started to feel like a deeply personal situation affecting real connections. The idea of trust being broken, whether real or perceived, became a central theme in discussions. People weren't just debating facts anymore. They were debating emotions. They imagined what it would feel like to be in that position, to have personal matters exposed, to face public judgment, to deal with the overwhelming pressure of millions of opinions. And as these discussions grew, sympathy began to spread, not just for one person, but for everyone involved, because regardless of what was true or false, the intensity of the situation was undeniable. It was overwhelming. It was relentless, and it showed no signs of slowing down. At the same time, new voices began to enter the conversation. Individuals claiming to have inside knowledge started sharing their perspectives, adding even more layers to an already complicated story. Some claimed that there were details the public didn't know, details that could completely change the narrative if they were revealed. Others suggested that certain elements of the story had been exaggerated, amplified beyond reality by the nature of social media itself. This created a new conflict, not just between individuals, but between versions of the truth. Which version was real? Which version had been manipulated? And which version was simply a product of imagination fueled by endless speculation? The questions multiplied, and the answers remained unclear. As the situation continued to evolve, one thing became increasingly evident: the story was no longer under anyone's control. It had taken on a life of its own. Every new development, every new theory, every new reaction added to its momentum, pushing it further into the spotlight and making it impossible to contain. Even those who tried to step back found themselves pulled back in, because the story was everywhere, on timelines, in conversations, across platforms. It became a constant presence, a topic that refused to fade. And just when it seemed like the narrative had reached its peak complexity, another unexpected twist surfaced. This time, it wasn't just a theory. It was something more concrete, something that appeared to challenge everything people thought they knew so far. New claims suggested that the situation might involve more individuals than originally believed, that the connections between the key figures were more intricate than they appeared on the surface, that there were unseen dynamics influencing the way events were unfolding. This revelation shifted the focus once again. Now, people weren't just looking at the main names involved. They were looking beyond them, trying to understand the bigger picture, trying to uncover hidden links, trying to make sense of a story that seemed to grow more complicated with every passing moment. The intensity of the situation reached a new level. Fans were no longer just observers. They had become participants in the narrative, contributing to its evolution through their interpretations, their discussions, and their reactions. And as the lines between observer and participant blurred, the story continued to expand, unpredictable, uncontrolled, and finished. Because despite everything that had already happened, despite all the speculation, all the analysis, all the emotional reactions, the truth still felt just out of reach. And as the tension continued to build, one thing became impossible to ignore. Something bigger was about to unfold. Something that would either bring clarity or push the entire situation into even deeper chaos. Something bigger was about to unfold, something that would either bring clarity or push the entire situation into even deeper chaos. And for a brief moment, it felt like the noise might finally settle, that maybe, just maybe, the storm had reached its peak. But that silence didn't last long. Because what came next didn't calm the situation, it detonated it. The new surge of activity began late at night, the kind that spreads quietly at first before exploding into full visibility by morning. Accounts that had previously remained silent suddenly became active. Old posts were resurfaced again, but this time with a different context, one that suggested there was a missing piece to the story that had been intentionally overlooked. This wasn't just speculation anymore. This felt coordinated. Fans were shocked as multiple narratives began aligning in a way that seemed almost too precise to be coincidence. Threads started appearing that laid out detailed timelines connecting events, interactions, and subtle clues that pointed towards something much deeper than anyone had imagined at the beginning. Emotions ran high as these timelines gained traction, because if they were even partially accurate, it meant that the situation wasn't random at all. It meant there was structure behind the chaos, and that realization changed everything suddenly. The focus shifted from what happened to why did it happen? Motives became the center of discussion. People began questioning not just actions, but intentions. What would someone gain from escalating a situation like this? Why would such a personal matter become public in such a dramatic way? And most importantly, who truly benefited from all of this? As these questions circulated, attention once again turned toward Claressa. But this time, the tone of the conversation was different. There was less immediate judgment and more curiosity. More people began to consider the possibility that she might not be at the center of the situation by choice, but rather by circumstance. That perhaps she had been pulled into something larger than herself, something that spiraled beyond control once it reached the public eye. This shift in perception created a noticeable divide. On one side were those who still believed the original narrative, holding onto the idea of betrayal and secrecy. On the other side were those who started to see her as someone navigating a situation that had been amplified far beyond its original scope. The divide wasn't just about opinions anymore. It was about perspective, and neither side was willing to back down. Meanwhile, the silence from certain key figures continued to amplify the tension, because in a situation filled with so much noise, silence became powerful. It created space for assumptions. It allowed people to fill in gaps with their own interpretations, and sometimes those interpretations were more dramatic than reality itself. At the same time, subtle changes in behavior began to catch people's attention. Not direct statements, not clear responses, but small, almost unnoticeable shifts, timing of posts, choice of words, moments of absence followed by sudden activity. All of it added to the growing sense that something was happening behind the scenes, something that the public wasn't fully aware of yet. And then came another twist. This time, it wasn't about new claims or resurfaced content. It was about contradiction. Information that had previously been accepted as fact started to fall apart under closer scrutiny. Details didn't align the way they were supposed to. Timelines that once seemed solid now appeared inconsistent. This created a new wave of confusion. Because if certain parts of the story weren't accurate, then what else had been misunderstood? The foundation of the narrative began to shake. And as it did, more people started questioning everything they thought they knew. Fans were shocked. Emotions ran high. The entire situation felt unstable, like it could shift in any direction at any moment. At this stage, the story was no longer linear. It didn't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. It had become fragmented, multiple versions existing at the same time, each one supported by different interpretations of the same events. And this fragmentation made it impossible to reach a single conclusion. But despite the confusion, one thing remained constant: attention. The story continued to dominate conversations. It continued to draw people in. It continued to evolve. And with every new development, the stakes felt higher, because now, it wasn't just about reputation, it was about control. Control over the narrative, control over perception, control over what people believed to be true. And as the struggle for that control intensified, the situation became even more unpredictable. At the same time, the emotional weight of everything that had unfolded began to surface in more visible ways. What had started as speculation now felt personal, not just for those involved, but for those watching. People connected to the story on a deeper level. They saw reflections of real-life situations, trust being questioned, relationships being tested, truths being distorted. And that connection made the story even more powerful, because it wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was something people felt, something they reacted to, something that stayed with them. As this emotional layer grew, so did the pressure on everyone involved. Because no matter what the truth was, no matter how the story eventually unfolded, the impact was already significant. Reputations had been challenged, perceptions had been altered, and the narrative had taken on a life that couldn't simply be reversed. And just when it seemed like the situation had reached its most complicated point, another development surfaced, one that didn't just add to the story, but threatened to redefine it entirely. This time, the focus wasn't on what had happened. It was on what might happen next. Speculation began shifting toward potential outcomes. What would the long-term impact be? Would there be direct confrontations? Would more information be revealed? Would the story eventually settle or continue to escalate? The uncertainty created a new kind of tension, not just about the present, but about the future. Because no one knew where this was heading, and that unpredictability made everything feel even more intense. As the situation continued to unfold, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point, a moment that would shape everything that came after. And as the story moved forward, building toward whatever came next, it carried with it all the complexity, all the emotion, and all the unanswered questions that had defined it from the very beginning, leaving everyone watching with the same thought. The biggest revelation might still be yet to come. The biggest revelation might still be yet to come, and just when it felt like the story had stretched to its absolute limit, everything shifted once again. This time, the energy was different. It wasn't just speculation anymore. It felt like something was closing in on the truth. The conversations online started slowing down, not because people lost interest, but because the tone changed. Instead of chaotic theories flying in every direction, discussions became more focused, more intense, as if everyone was waiting for one final piece to fall into place. Fans were watching closely. Every move mattered now. Every detail felt important. Because after everything that had happened, the rumors, the accusations, the emotional reactions, people wanted answers. Real answers, not hints, not cryptic posts, not assumptions, but clarity. At the center of this tension remained Claressa, whose presence in the narrative had transformed from being the subject of accusations to something far more complex. She was no longer just reacting, she appeared to be holding something back, something that could potentially reshape the entire story if revealed. This perception alone changed how people viewed her. Some saw strength, others saw strategy, and some believed she was simply waiting for the right moment. At the same time, the pressure surrounding the situation reached its peak because now it wasn't just about what had already happened. It was about what would happen next. Would everything finally be exposed? Would the truth come out in a way that silenced the noise? Or would the story take yet another unexpected turn? Meanwhile, attention once again circled toward the other key figure who had remained at the center of the storm: 50 Cent. His presence throughout the situation had been consistent, but never fully direct. And as the tension built toward what felt like a breaking point, people began to question whether he would finally step forward in a way that brought clarity or if he would continue to operate in the shadows, letting the narrative speak for itself. The uncertainty kept everyone on edge. Fans were shocked at how long the situation had sustained such intensity. Emotions ran high as people debated what they believed the outcome would be. Some were convinced that everything would soon be revealed in a way that changed public perception completely. Others believed that the truth would remain fragmented, leaving the story open-ended and unresolved. And then came a moment that shifted everything. Not an explosion, not a dramatic reveal, but something quieter, something subtle, a shift in tone, a change in energy. It wasn't one single action, it was a combination of small signals that, together, suggested that the situation might finally be approaching some kind of resolution. The chaos that once defined the story began to slow. The intensity softened. And for the first time since everything began, it felt like the narrative was no longer spiraling outward but instead narrowing toward a conclusion. But even in that moment of calm, the questions remained. What was real? What had been exaggerated? What had been misunderstood? And perhaps the most important question of all, what had been left unsaid? Because even as the story appeared to settle, there was a lingering sense that not everything had been revealed, that there were still pieces missing, that the full truth might be more complicated than anything the public had seen so far, and that uncertainty is what kept people talking. Even as the noise faded, the curiosity remained, the debates continued, and the story, in many ways, stayed alive. Because situations like this don't just end, they evolve. They leave behind questions, perspectives, and moments that people continue to analyze long after the headlines disappear. And this one was no different. It had everything: drama, emotion, mystery, and a narrative that blurred the line between reality and perception. And now it leaves you with a decision. What do you believe really happened? Do you think this was all a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Or do you believe there's still a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your opinion matters more than ever in a story like this. And if you've been following every twist, every turn, and every shocking moment, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because if this situation has proven anything, so now I want to hear from you. What do you really think is going on behind all this drama? Do you believe everything was just blown out of proportion? Or do you think there's still something bigger that hasn't been revealed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I'm reading everything. And trust me, the best theories always come from you guys. And don't just watch and scroll. Hit that like button if this shocked you. Subscribe to the channel for more intense, drama-filled stories like this. And turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next part drops, because if this situation continues, you already know we're covering every single update. Stay tuned, because the next twist might be closer than you think.